How would I sum up the last 25 years of Best Friends? What an amazing question.
I get asked, is this like the vision you had in the beginning and things like that? And my answer to that is often when I get that question is, what vision?
Looking out over the canyon, it's spectacularly beautiful. The place is beautiful, it always has been. It's always been an inspiration to us. And at my feet, there are a bunch of ants running around on the patio here in back of the offices. And when I look at these ants, you think that it's a total random activity, well, apparently. But of course they know what they're doing. There's a plan somewhere and they're following it. Well, in a sense, that's kind of the way the last 25 years for Best Friends has been for us.
We didn't really know what was going to happen when we started it. We were passionate about the animals. We wanted to help animals. We knew that we had that in our destiny almost, if you like. But really, what we were going to do, how we were going to do it, all of that developed as we went along.
Because in the very early days, it was just putting one foot in front of the other.
It started out with this enormous undertaking that we had no idea we were really, the implications of it or the scope of it. But eventually we were working to a plan, and we were working to support the cause of the animals and ultimately build Best Friends. And so I guess that random activity that might have seemed totally random from 50,000 feet, it all had a purpose and it all came together, and this amazing event of Best Friends is what came out of that. And I don't know that necessarily each individual ant has an idea of the whole picture of what they're doing, nor did any of us have an idea of the whole picture of what we were doing. But we all did our part, and it came together in this wonderful, amazing Best Friends Animal Society, which has now become a force for good for animals really all over the world.
Really how we got into this was being horrified at the fact that healthy, wonderful animals were being killed in shelters, and that became more and more apparent to us. We went to shelters and picked out animals that were scheduled for euthanasia, took them back and found homes for them.
It was really an all or nothing kind of commitment. We decided early on that the notion of killing animals to solve the problem of overpopulation was really unacceptable. And so for us at the beginning, it was just a question of how do we find a piece of land big enough and make some shelter there and create a home for these 150 or so animals. It really wasn't anything like the scope that it's become. After we first opened the doors, said we were going to take in unwanted pets, everybody around here obliged us very quickly. So it wasn't very long before we had a lot more than we started out, and we had to expand our scope. But initially, it was just that. We wanted to have a place to take care of those few animals.
Well, in 1982, I happened to be in this part of the country, and as was a habit, was looking for a place that, might fulfill this collective dream that we often fantasized about of starting a place that we could do all the things that we wanted to do, a retreat for people, animal sanctuary, a variety of things, and came across this piece of land. I remember very clearly driving in the beginning of June. We managed to get into this for about $5,000 down, which was crazy. It was amazing. I thought couldn't possibly be for sale and we couldn't possibly afford it. But just to get into this at that price was just remarkable. So we landed here in 1984, and it was in the winter. We arrived in February, started clearing roads, clearing sagebrush, and that's kind of the first groundbreaking, was just a group of us here with a trailer and a truck and a couple of dogs and freezing our butts off.
When I came here, this is January '84, I set foot on the ground and I said, this is it. It was just a sense of I'm not going to go anywhere from here. So ever since that, it's always been a sense of adventure. When we came here, there was nothing, no water, no telephone, no nothing. We're all city boys, and we decided we're going to raw earth it. And before that, I never even owned a hammer. But we started building, and we started doing all the things that was needed in order to make the place.
We didn't hire initially hire any contractors. There were certain things, you know, when we needed to pour concrete, we had to hire the local concrete pourer. But all the buildings and the dog runs and catteries and the roads and everything, we did ourselves with volunteer help. But it was real simple, basic stuff, you know, to begin with. For example, to build a road, we would go through and mark with red tape where the road needed to go, and then we would drive a Jeep over that, or a pickup truck, several times, and then there was a road.
We were all involved in just physical work, constructing buildings, and bit by bit I learned enough to be able to put together what was required for the electric and the water throughout the canyon in the early days.
We just started building, we just started doing things.
And we did all this ourselves, and you know, with a kind of a Time Life how do-it-yourself book. It wasn't necessarily pretty on some of the engineering feats, but it worked.
All of us had like the animals in common, but some of us have known each other for almost 40 years. Like I met Michael in Los Angeles and met Faith in Rome, actually. Cyrus in Germany, Anne in Toronto, Francis in New York. So we've been hanging around together for a long time. And when we came here, it actually galvanized and focused what we were about. But the amount of, again, it's like the dedication and the actual love and care that we actually, each of us had in our own way, has kind of like created best friends.
The animals that everybody moved here with were primarily shelter rescues, primarily going in, and they weren't specifically special needs by focus, other than the fact that their time was up at the shelter, which gave them an immediate, really pretty dramatic need.
The original group, as I recall, were mostly from the local area, and they were dogs that people didn't want. There were a lot of dogs that just wandered around. They were strays.
There were also street rescues, and it was during that original rescue work, pre-'84 really, that we had our first exposure to and experience in caring for cats with feline leukemia. There wasn't a vaccination at the time for it. There was, depending on which vet you might work with, there was a pessimistic relationship to the outcome for the cats. Our philosophy being that while they're happy and healthy and enjoying their lives, you take care of them, and so we did.
Were we thinking of this as kind of, we're going to open the nation's largest sanctuary? No, not in the least. Whether we called it an animal sanctuary or not, we'd already had about 200 animals amongst the group of us. One day, one of those dogs wandered off. So this dog wound up in town and wound up in the local shelter. The local shelter is a stretch. It was a tin roof shed in a field on the other side of a wash in back of the airport, baking hot sun, little chain link fence around it. Once a week a vet would arrive from St. George and put all the animals there to sleep. It was sad and depressing. We were very grateful to have rescued the dog that was lost from there. I was tasked with going and talking to the mayor, and we were going to do animal control. And we thought, well, look, we'll put up some runs and do some things. How bad could it be? You know, it's got to be pretty easy. It's a little town. You know, it's a big deal. So the mayor's out there watering his lawn. He has one of those old-fashioned, you know, fan-shaped nozzles on the end of a hose, and is just doing this, taking his time. And I said, Mayor Johnson, hi, you know, we've just acquired the property up the canyon, and well, we'd like to do animal control. And he turned away, looked, gave it a moment's thought, and said, okay. It was that easy.
It was unofficial animal control, unofficial and unpaid, so just so everyone knows that. But people would call into the police department with complaints, you know, a dog at large, or a dog had bitten a child, or something like that. Sometimes it was cats as well, nuisance cat complaints. But then I would be the one that would go out and pick up the dogs. in those days, the phone would ring, and it could be from the Kanab City Police, Kane County Sheriff's Office, Fredonia Marshal, or the Paiute Tribal Police. So I never knew which law enforcement office would be calling.
Faith was out there day and night in her denim smock, old pickup truck. Dogs would come up, smell her, yeah, you smell great, you know, and into the truck they'd jump, no problem. But before you knew it, we had about 1,200 animals, and a lot of them someone would say, oh, I've got some cats under the house. Okay, we'll take care of them. We had a wonderful vet who worked with us, but he was a farm vet, and he would periodically bump into what he called, woodpile cats. So the woodpile cats, feral cats basically, who were living on these little ranches around the place, and a lot of them had terrible eye infections and injuries, and he would bring them to our attention, and we would bring them here, and so all of that contributed to this ridiculous, growth of animals that were coming into the sanctuary. And by that time, it was a sanctuary.
One of the very first structures that we built was Kitty Motel. And Kitty Motel was really a glorified tough shed that we attached other glorified tough sheds to make a building. There was a kitchenette that was built on it as a unit, a modular unit, and each room housed different cats, whether it was cats that were feral or cats like we had the white cat room, which had extra shade cloth that we'd put all over the screening so that they didn't get sunburnt, which was definitely a little bit of a challenge in the summers in the middle of the desert. We had our leukemia cats, our FIV cats. We had our very first incontinental suite. We're all part of that original structure. And one of the rooms I bunked in. I'm sitting in the Kitty Motel and in one of the runs to the Kitty Motel, and a lot of the cats that we house here are really quite affectionate but have medical problems.
We had taken a lot of the animals, our original group, our sort of base group, were from the Yavapai Humane Society in Prescott, Arizona, and it was very much a traditional shelter, the ones that everybody knows. Fortunately, a lot of those are being phased out everywhere now, but the concrete inside, the concrete run outside, the guillotine door, and it was just, well, we just don't want to do that.
We borrowed actually the idea of the octagon from Living Free in Southern California, and ran with it and developed it.
And they had used an octagon-shaped building. The thing that particularly interested me about it was the size of the runs they had, the compounds, but they also had a lot of playthings in the yards, and I went, oh, I like that. I liked that concept of having an almost circular building so that you could stand in the middle and you could see everybody, but also that you could make the yards as big as you wanted, as big as money would allow.
We designed it for their convenience more than ours. There are rafters which are really annoying to get up in there and clean, and yes, some of them go to the bathroom up there, and yes, you have to get up and clean it every day. But it's their world, it's their three-dimensional world, and it gives them a life that's not at our convenience, but it meets their needs, and that was on purpose.
Housing dogs together, and the reason we did that is many of us that started Best Friends, we were acquiring our animals from Humane Society shelters that were about to be euthanized. And we were living with several in our own homes of all sizes. I used to live with anything from over 100 pounds down to 4 or 5 pound Chihuahuas. So we thought, well, if we could do it, then why not? And we saw how much dogs like being with other dogs. And so how about we try this? So group housing was very novel back then and risky. And I'm not saying there isn't some risk involved, but for the quality of life of the dogs, and we didn't know if we would be able to get new homes for a lot of these dogs. So we were looking at a potential of lifetime care. I mean, obviously we wanted homes, but if they were going to live here, for any length of time. We wanted it to be a decent and quality life.
In the early days, a lot of the dogs, particularly that came to us, were dogs that were your average rambunctious, mongrel, adolescent male dog. That was described a lot of the dogs, and they weren't really that big of a problem. A lot of these dogs were very happy with each other. We had groups of 6 to 8 for the most part, and dogs that were sort of the trustees who weren't going to run off all spent the day out. So if you came to Dogtown, you would see 30 dogs just wandering around in the middle of the Dogtown area with this huge Malamute named Amra as their leader.
Amra was what we ingloriously call a dump, meaning we suddenly found him one morning, and he was a very, very socialized, social dog. He was a 145-pound red Alaskan Malamute. Beautiful, beautiful dog. We couldn't understand why somebody didn't want him. You know, he just, Dogtown was his place. And his girlfriend Rhonda was particularly, that was particularly interesting, because a lot of our couples were arranged, if you like, because we were deciding which dogs went with other dogs. And Rhonda, who was also what we called an out dog, picked him. He was 145 pounds, she was 17.
He would come over and sort of officially wander up and give a big smile to whoever came in, sort of put his head between their legs, kind of lift him up off the ground. And he had his girlfriend, Rhonda, who was not really great with people, but absolutely devoted to Amra. So Amra was the head of Dogtown, and then we had all these different characters who were out there. And so the mythology and the characters just grew out of these dogs.
I remember coming outside, I think it was at the end of the morning, made hundreds of meals. And I just stood there on the little porch there. I was feeling quite proud of myself, as one does. You survey your kingdom and you go, I did a good thing here. Because you feel you're in control, because you built the buildings, you created the compound runs, you even put most of the dog groups together. So you kind of feel that you have some say in it. But I began to see the place through the dog's eyes. And it was like alarming shock, because I thought I was in control. And then I realized, of course, I wasn't in control. This was their place. They had their own society, their own relationships. And so watching this dynamic between them, and it was never the same after that. Never the same. I saw it as Dogtown. It was Dogtown.